Are you spacing your pepper plants too close together? In this video, I'll share the best way to space your peppers in the garden and why it really does matter. If you just came for a quick answer, maybe you're in the garden right now trying to figure out how far apart to space your pepper plants, our general rule is between 12 and 18 inches is good spacing for pretty much any type of pepper. There definitely are some situations where you might want to go a little bit farther apart based on the type of pepper you're growing or your specific goals, and I'll get to that in this video. If you've been growing peppers for a while, you might think 12-inch spacing is a little bit tight, a little closer than normally recommended, and that's definitely true, but you can go that close, and I want to talk about some of the benefits of spacing your plants closer together. First, your plants will grow taller when they're spaced closer together. This is because they're competing for lateral or horizontal space, and so the plants will direct their energy towards growing taller rather than wider. Taller plants aren't necessarily a good thing, but when you have many plants in the garden all spaced closer together, it means that the overall yield of your plants when they're spaced closer can be comparable or even better than spacing them farther apart. Now, you might think taller plants are going to be more susceptible to windy conditions and breaking off at their stems, but that's not the case when you have many plants spaced closer together. They actually support one another, especially later in the season. Each pepper stem that is rooted into the ground is essentially acting as a stake, and so all of these plants grouped together will be very resilient to stormy and windy conditions. Another benefit to spacing peppers close together is that the peppers, the actual fruits, will be well shaded under the canopy of leaves. Bell peppers and other large pepper varieties are pretty susceptible to sun scald on the actual fruits. If you have an individual plant in the middle of a garden or an open field, when the sun rises or sets, it's very low in the sky, it's coming in at a harsh angle, hitting the fruits directly. That doesn't really happen when you have a nice sea of pepper plants all well shaded by a blanket of leaves. The only caveat here is that it can be difficult for you to find the fruits when it comes time to harvest. You have to wade your way through all of this foliage to find the fruits, but I think the benefit here definitely outweighs that drawback. And the last benefit is that by spacing closer together, you can grow more varieties and squeeze more into a smaller space. Yes, you will be getting a smaller harvest per plant because each individual plant will be smaller and more slender and tall, so each individual plant will be giving you less, but if your goal is to try as many different peppers in each season as possible, then this will help you do so. So those are the benefits to spacing closer together. What are the benefits of spacing a little bit farther apart and giving your plants room to breathe? Well, the first benefit, I basically just said it. The plants will have better airflow when they're spaced a bit farther apart, leading to less issues with disease or pests if you've dealt with that in the past. I personally prefer to go a little bit wider for this reason alone. We have some disease here in New England, and there are other places where disease is a major issue, so if there's any risk of disease in your area, you may want to go about 18 inches on spacing to reduce the chances. But there are some other benefits to spacing farther apart, one of which is that each individual plant will give you a larger yield than if you space them really close together. So if your goal is to grow the largest plant possible with the biggest yield on a single plant, then you'll definitely want to give that plant space to spread out. And another benefit is that it's much easier to harvest when you give your plants some room to breathe. Later in the season, when the plants are fully grown and full of foliage, it can be pretty difficult to reach your way into the middle of the garden and harvest a specific pepper that's begun to ripen. If you give space for the plants to grow, there's also space between them for you to reach in and also look in and see when those peppers are starting to ripen up. Next, I want to talk about some specific varieties and categories of peppers and how you should space those peppers for the best possible result. But before I get to that, if you want to learn how to grow peppers like we do and get amazing results from your garden, check out our ebook, Growing Perfect Peppers, at the first link in the description below. It's our full guide. Everything we know about growing peppers is in that book, so if you're just getting started or you want to take things to the next level, it should help you get the results you want out of your garden. Okay, now let's talk about spacing for specific pepper varieties and groups of peppers, and I want to start with Capsicum annuum, which is by far the most popular species of pepper, and it contains most of the most popular peppers like bell peppers, banana peppers, serranos, jalapenos. Most of the sweet peppers that you'll grow in the garden come from this species, and these plants are pretty conducive to being spaced pretty close together. If you plant them in a container, you'll notice that they naturally grow tall and slender, so by spacing these plants closer together, you're not sacrificing too much of that lateral space, and they'll naturally grow taller anyway. Plus, like I mentioned before, it's a good way to avoid sun scald on the fruits. Many of the peppers in this species are susceptible to that, including banana peppers and bell peppers and even jalapenos. So if you want to do some intensive planting, you could space them as close as 12 inches together. I'd recommend a little bit more than that, maybe 15 inches apart, stem to stem, if you want to get the most out of your garden. This will also really come in handy later in the season when those bell peppers are coming onto the plants and weighing them down. All of the stems of the plants act like stakes, and when they're all fully grown, they'll lean against each other, forming a nice shield against stormy conditions. This next category of peppers really likes to spread out wide and will prefer much wider spacing, and that is anything from Capsicum chinense. This here is a ghost pepper seedling, and you can already see at this stage that the plant is very wide, it's spreading out laterally, and it's not all that tall. You can still space them closer together, but conditions will be much stuffier and the plants will be forced to grow upright, but they don't thrive in these conditions and it will directly impact your overall yield. So when growing these plants, I usually go at least 18 inches, sometimes up to 24 inches if you're trying to get the biggest plant possible out of your garden. There is a law of diminishing returns here though. I wouldn't go any wider than 24 inches because then you're going to leave empty space open in your garden beds. Of course, you could fill those up with other plants. Of course, there are many companion plants that will benefit your peppers in the garden. But I do want to reiterate, it's really important to give these plants enough space to spread out to get the maximum yield off of them. They can grow to be massive plants. Pretty much anything from Capsicum chinense can grow to be a really impressive specimen, and we love growing at least one giant hot pepper plant every single year. And one other category worth mentioning are sort of the specialty peppers. There are some dwarf varieties that don't grow any larger than say 8 or 10 inches tall, regardless of where they're planted. So make sure if you're growing those varieties to space them much closer together. A couple of miscellaneous things here that are related to spacing. If you're growing other plants, make sure that you're mindful of their spacing requirements as well. Just because your peppers only need 12 to 18 inches doesn't mean that you should space them 12 inches away from, say, a tomato plant, which really prefers to have much more space, usually 18 to 24 inches from one tomato plant to the next. So you want to be mindful and make sure you're not overcrowding with other species. Also, you don't have to just grow peppers, and I'm not going to assume that you are only growing peppers. So if you are growing other companion plants, maybe some flowers like zinnias, you can interplant them with these other plants, making it easier for you to harvest while also getting some of the benefits of closer spacing in the process. Lastly, I just want to touch on container gardening. Most of the content in this video has centered around in-ground planting or planting in raised beds. But if you are growing in containers, you can still get some of the benefits of spacing closer together. If you group your containers next to one another, they still will support one another. You can get a taller crop and protect those peppers from sun scald with a denser canopy of foliage. But the nice thing about container gardening, of course, is that you can move the containers around as needed. Just be careful if you do space the plants close together and you go to move one of them later in the season, those tall, spindly plants aren't all that well supported on their own, so you will want to use stakes or some type of cage or something like that to make sure that each plant can stay upright on its own. Let me know if you agree with our spacing guidelines or if you space your pepper plants differently for some reason. I'd love to learn how you do it in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching Pepper Geek, and I'll see you soon.